All right, is anybody ready to learn from the Word of God tonight? All right. Okay, this is going to be the strangest introduction to a sermon that you probably have ever heard, okay? This is going to come out of nowhere. If you hate math, raise your hand if you hate math. Okay, you are not going to like this, all right? But stay with me. Don't phase out on me yet. My brother-in-law taught me something many years ago, a great party trick. I've used this thing all over, in life groups, in classes, Bible study. I even used it in a worship service here a long time ago. So we're gonna do it right now. Pay attention, and your next party, you're gonna be the party animal, okay? So I'm gonna show you how to do this, and it's all gonna make sense in a few minutes, but hang with me, okay? I'm gonna do a math problem with you. It's got 8 steps, so hang with me. You can make this happen. Step number 1, in your mind right now, I want you to pick a number between 2 and 9. Don't tell anybody, just here, all right? Any number, whatever your favorite number is, between 2 and 9. Step 2, multiply that number by 9. Now, some of y'all got to grab your phone and do the calculator, do what you got to do, but multiply it by 9. Right in your mind, nobody knows, just you. This is going to blow your mind in a minute. Now, probably right now, you have a 2-digit number in your mind. So go to step 3. And I want you to take those 2 digits and add them together, okay? So whatever those 2 digits were, add them together. And my guess is that you now have a 1-digit number in your mind. Don't tell nobody. 1 digit. Step 4, subtract 5 from that number. And so whatever you have right now, listen, bro, that's your number, okay? Don't tell a soul. You got 1 number. Now, step 5 is this. Turn your number into a letter. What? Here's how you do that. If your number is 1, your letter's A. 2, B. So just kind of march yourself through the alphabet and figure that out so that you have a number and a letter, okay? Now, just as a sign, so I know where I'm at, how many of you totally lost already, okay? All right, a few of you, you're gone. Figure out your grocery list. Okay, so you got a number and a letter. Okay, now watch, step 6. Think of a country that starts with your letter. Arkansas is not a country. Tokyo is not a country. Think of a country that starts with your letter, all right? Everybody with me? Now watch this. Now go to step 7. Watch this. Take the last letter of your country. You got to be able to spell to do this. And think of an animal that starts with that letter. So you take your country, spelled out, last letter. Think of an animal that starts with that letter. So you got a number, you got a letter, you got a country, you got an animal. Now take the last step here is to take the last letter of your animal and think of a color that starts with that letter. Now watch this. If this is where you're at and what's in your mind, I want you to stand up. I just want to see if I fooled anybody, okay? So if in your mind you're thinking this, 4 orange kangaroos in Denmark, would you stand up? Okay. What is going on? That's worth the price of admission, isn't it, huh? All right, you can have a seat. And for $100 afterwards, I'll tell you how we did that. You can be the party animal now. Now, what's that have to do with my sermon? Nothing. I just thought it was a really cool thing to do. No, it actually has a connection, okay? So stay with me, okay? We're in a series called How Many Times Do I Have to Tell You? And so y'all know that, okay? We've been doing this for a while. And so 4 guys in the Bible wrote about the life story of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, okay? So y'all know that. We're good with that here. And it doesn't happen very often, but every once in a while, those 4 guys told the same story or the same lesson that Jesus gave. Every once in a while, all four of them told the same thing. It was God's way of saying, you can't miss this. I'm going to tell you 4 times. So y'all know that. So we've taken a few weeks here at Eastside, and we said, let's go and look and find those things in the Bible because they must be pretty big deals to God. So we've talked about the baptism of Jesus, and we've talked about the calling of the 12 disciples. We talked about the feeding of the 5,000. So we've talked about a few of them. And for the next 3 weeks here at our church, we're going to talk about the last ones. And it's all about a math problem. And if you can't figure this math problem out, you'll miss the importance of this last thing that all the guys talked about. So let me show you the math problem, okay? Now stay with me. If you lost me in the first one, you'll probably be okay on this one, okay? Now watch this. We're not sure about this. We estimated about how long Jesus lived. And so people who know how to study those kinds of things have kind of landed up between Jesus died somewhere between about 33 and maybe 39. Somewhere in there, that's how long he lived. Let's just say 33. Let's say that the life of Jesus was 33 years. That translates to 1,700 weeks. Now, it's not exact. I've rounded it off, so don't send me emails that I can't multiply. So it's about 1,700 weeks. Now, watch this. If I took one of those weeks out of 1,700, just 1 week, it would translate to this, 0.06% of his total life. Just any week is 0.06% of his life. Stay with me, don't lose me. This is crazy, okay? Stay with me. So in other words, 1 week of his life is like this much of his life, hardly anything. Now, if we took the last week of his life, from Sunday to Sunday, the last week of his life before his resurrection, that is just a real tiny portion of his life, 0.06%, hardly anything that's part of his life. But all 4 guys wrote about that week, all 4 of them. And they not only wrote about that week, but almost all of their writing was about that week, all of them. So let me show you how it worked. With Matthew, 36% of everything he wrote about was about that 0.6% the last week of his life. Matthew's like, man, that's where it happens. When Mark starts writing, Mark ends up exactly the same thing. 36% of everything he wrote was about that 1 week. When Luke wrote his account, it wasn't quite as much, but it was still totally out of proportion. Luke had 21% was about that last week. John bumps it up again, 33%. So what are we saying here? What are we saying? Is that God shouts from the mountaintops, pay attention to the last week. Don't miss the last week. And so when these guys wrote about it, they put all their eggs into that basket. And we all know the value of eggs nowadays, don't we, huh? And so as we consider this idea that if God told all 4 guys to write the same thing about a few events, that's important, nothing's more important than the last week. And so the way we're gonna wind this series down is we're gonna break the last week into 3 parts. And so today we're gonna talk about the early part of that week, which was Sunday and Monday. Next week, when you come back, we're gonna look at the middle part of that week from Tuesday to Thursday. And then on our last weekend of this series, we'll zero in on the end of the week, primarily Friday. And we'll save Sunday for the awesomeness of Easter weekend, okay? But today, let's walk through the early part of the last week of the life of Jesus. And as we do that, I think you're going to see something come to the come to the surface. I wasn't really sure what would happen when we dove into that study and looked at the early part of this week. And I went into it wondering, okay, God, what do you have? And just bubbling from the study that I did are some reminders that you need. And I think about our people in our church right now. I think about my own life and the reminders that I'm going to show you in these 2 days. Some of you came tonight and you need these reminders so much. So it all starts in a little town called Bethany. Bethany was about 2 miles from the outskirts of Jerusalem. If you're looking at Jerusalem on a map, about 2 miles to the southeast is a little community called Bethany. And Jesus spent a lot of evenings in Bethany because he had some buddies there. Lazarus, whom he raised from the dead. A guy by the name of Simon, who had dinners in the honor of Jesus. And so if you watched the map and looked at what Jesus was doing leading up to this last week, you see him moving toward Bethany. He arrives at Bethany, spends the evening, wakes up on Sunday morning. The Sunday morning before the resurrection. And Jesus wakes up in the home of Simon in Bethany, and he gathers his disciples together, and he makes an announcement on the plans of the day. This is what we're going to do. Now, if you're married, you've got a wife that does that for you. This is what you will be doing today. Jesus woke up and announced, here's what will happen on this day. Look at how Mark described it. Mark said it this way. The words of Jesus, we're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. Move on to the next part of the verse. They will condemn him to death, and they will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him, spit on him, flog him, and kill him. That's what we're going to do today. Now, I don't know about y'all, but if I'm one of the guys in the audience hearing that, I go, hey, I got an idea. How about we don't go to Jerusalem? Why are we going to go when that is going to happen? The other night, my wife Susan and I had long days, and so we didn't get home like we normally do for dinner time. And so in the later part of the evening, we started texting each other, hey, where do you want to eat? Let's go find somewhere and we can eat something. And we picked a restaurant that we both agreed upon, which was a minor miracle from the hand of heaven. And so we said, okay, let's go to that. It was a chain restaurant, and there are 3 or 4 that we could go to. And we were asking, well, okay, which one do you want to meet at? And we picked the one where we thought the area was the safest. We were sitting over dinner at this place, and we said, you know, do you realize where we're at today is that we chose not to go to areas at night where we didn't think we would be safe. Jesus wakes up early on Sunday, gathers his guys and said, let's go to Jerusalem where they will kill me. I mean, somebody in the crowd had to say, come on now. And there's somebody else we can go, someplace we can find ourselves in. And Jesus said, no, we're going to go to Jerusalem. And so they take off. And it's interesting when you're reading the story in the text that it seems that everybody kind of caught into that. They had this compassion to be able to follow him. Jesus saying, this is where we're going to go. They're going to kill me. And I want you to stop there for a second because this is intentional. They didn't drag Jesus to Jerusalem to kill him. He went to Jerusalem on his own and let them kill him. It was a foundational, non-negotiable truth that everybody ought to remember for all of time. And there are those in the room who need to hear this today. And that is by going to Jerusalem, Jesus were proclaiming that he loves us. He was going to do whatever he had to do to rescue us from the penalty of our sins. He was going to pave the way that we could be in heaven someday. And the only way that could happen is if he dies in Jerusalem. And you know, every once in a while, I think we need to hear that. Every once in a while, I think that reminder needs to come to us. He loves you. Listen to me. No matter where you are, where you've come from, what you've done, no matter how you think you might have messed up, he loves you. I meet people all the time that start coming to our church and they live in guilt and shame, and there's something in their past that they regret. Some people are coming and they're embarrassed about what's going on in their life right now, and they hear things about the love of God, and they agree with that God is loving, but deep, deep in their soul, they wonder, how could he ever love me? You see, the reality is, and I want you to hear this, if you've ever struggled with whether God loves you right now, I want you to hear this. He chose to go to Jerusalem with you on his mind. He loves you. A number of years ago, I preached at a church, and one of the things they did in this church was they had certain people from their congregation that they asked to come up and talk about communion before we shared it. And so just common people were recruited, and one day I heard they had recruited a gentleman. We're just gonna call him Patrick. And they told me Patrick's gonna talk about communion today, and I objected to it. Not Patrick, come on, anybody but Patrick. Because I knew Patrick would just bomb. I knew he wouldn't be able to talk in front of people. I knew as soon as he came up and saw the crowd and the lights that he would just melt. He would stutter. It would be embarrassing. But I didn't call that shot, and so Patrick was chosen that day. When it came time for Patrick to come up, he was up behind the podium. He looked out and immediately started to wilt and stutter and couldn't get his words and was all messed up. And I was whispering, I told him, it's going to be bad. Finally, Patrick composed himself enough and started reading John 3:16 from the King James language. And I remember thinking, King James, are you kidding me? Nobody's going to understand these and thous, and this is horrible. And I'm sitting there in the midst of my despair that we got a guy up here talking that probably shouldn't be the guy up here talking. And he then explained to the church, he said, I kind of got stuck up with that word, whosoever. You remember, whosoever should believe in him. And he said, I didn't know what whosoever meant. And I was thinking, you goofball, everybody knows what whosoever. And he said, I've studied it and I found out that it means even if but one. And then Patrick said, I learned this week that if I was the only person on the earth, he would have still died for me. And I've never read John 3:16 the same again. I want you to hear this. If you were the only person on the earth, listen to me. You're the only person. He still would have went to Jerusalem for you because he loves you. And as this week starts out, that will become the week that will change the history of the world, he begins it early Sunday morning with his guys. We're going to Jerusalem because I love you. It is a foundational, non-negotiable message that all must forever remember. And so when you go back to the story, they take off to Jerusalem. And news must have spread pretty quick that they were going, because many people in Bethany and the surrounding areas joined in the trip. You read the Bible, those four authors, and they tell us that it became somewhat of a 2-mile parade route. There's this huge crowd of people walking with them. There's a great big crowd in front of him, a great big crowd behind him. And as they walk for the 2 miles, people are grabbing branches off trees and they're laying them before Jesus as a sign of honor and tribute. The same thing we would do when we lay the red carpet out for somebody. Luke tells us that as they laid these branches out, they began to sing to him. And so they're laying the branches out. They're raising their hands to Jesus. And Luke says they're singing, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord." Matthew said it was a great, large crowd. They arrive at the edge of Jerusalem. And apparently that news gets to those in the city. And the Bible says that they all started coming from the city. What's going on? Who is this? And what is happening is what you and I have labeled the triumphal entry into the city of Jerusalem. And hundreds and maybe thousands of people have focused on this one man. Now, in your mind, as you're thinking through what that parade must have looked like, they arrive in Jerusalem with all these people. And if there was a way that I could go to every one of you in the room and cup your face and bring you here eyeball to eyeball with me, I'd do that right now because I don't want you to miss this. 5 days later, when Jesus was hanging on a cross, listen, the crowd was gone. We go from multitudes where Matthew proclaims a great, large company on Sunday to Friday, 6 people. The mother of Jesus, the sister of the mother of Jesus, 2 women who helped Jesus often in his travels, the best friend of Jesus, John, and some guy named Simon who they made carry the cross. There were only 6 people at Friday. So I got a question. It's a really important question if you understand this week. And the question is, what happened to the crowd? Where'd the crowd go? Where'd everybody on Sunday go? Because when we arrive on Friday, they're not there. Let me tell you what's happening. Because the crowd on Sunday thought that Jesus was the next king who was going to help Israel overtake the shadows of Rome, and they could once again be the world power. It's the same thing that we watch on television at crazy political campaign rallies. It's the same thing. They thought that's what Jesus was going to be. That's what he was going to do. And then 5 days later, don't miss this, as soon as he saw that his agenda was not their agenda, dude, they hightailed it out. It appears many in the crowd on Sunday laying the palm branches and singing at his feet were now there on Friday calling for his death. How'd that happen? Because Jesus made it clear that he was not here to fix your agenda. He was here to establish his own. It brings to light another foundational, non-negotiable truth in this story. It's not a popular truth. Before I put it up here, I want you to know that it's not something you're going to cheer about. Now, he loves us. That true? Oh, baby, we like that, man. He loves us. He loves me even though he knows who I am and where I've messed up. I like that. I'll take that all day, bro. But the second truth, you see, he loves us, but he wants this clear. And the truth is, that he will also lead us. And the problem with that is that we human beings tend to get that turned around at times. Instead of him leading us, we want to lead him. And so early in the week, Jesus establishes, I call the shots, you don't. And so he arrives at Sunday evening into the city. The Bible tells us that he went to the temple and he just looked around. Check that out. We don't know what he did Sunday evening other than he went to the temple. He just checked it out. He just looked at what was going on. And then he said, let's go back to Bethany. And so they take a 2-mile trip back to Bethany where they spend the evening and they wake up on Monday morning. And Jesus said, let's go back to Bethany. And so from Bethany, they make the 2-mile stretch and they arrive in the city of Jerusalem again, and he goes straight to the temple. And many of you know what he did Monday morning. Walked into the temple and turned over the tables of people who were charging exorbitant amounts of money for sacrificial animals. Some people say Jesus lost his mind. He didn't lose his mind. He'd been thinking about it all night. He saw it the night before. He probably couldn't sleep. He wakes up on Monday morning. We're going to the temple. He sets things straight in the temple because he wants them to know something. We're not going to do the temple the way you guys are doing the temple. Because I lead you, you don't lead me. And it's interesting that after that blow up at the temple, for the rest of the week, the temperature gets hotter because Jesus makes more and more clear that yes, I love you, but I expect to lead you. And watch, the crowd on Friday is really little. And all the Sunday people are gone. Why? Because they didn't want him to lead them. So let me ask you a question. Let me be pointed and be really open about this. I want you to think about this and evaluate it. The question is very clear. I think all of us would have been there on Sunday. I mean, by nature of the fact that you're here in God's house, in a worship service, shows that you would have had enough interest in Jesus to go see what was going on. You and I, all of us, would have been there Sunday. But would you have been there Friday? Would you have chosen to stay until Friday? Because I've observed through the years that there's a critical difference between Sunday people and Friday people. Sunday people say, we lead him. Friday people say, he leads me. Are you a Sunday person or are you a Friday person? There's a guy by the name of Jim Probst who is an executive pastor at our sister church in New Albany at Northside. I heard Jim talking one day about this, and I texted him afterwards, and I said, dude, what you said was so incredibly gold that I'm going to steal it someday and use it, and today's the day. Jim explained that there's a lot of people, even people who believe in God, and I'm kind of one of those at times, and you might be too, people who tend to live their life with this understanding. Check this out. Our rule, his role. What does that mean? What does that mean? If you live within that viewpoint of your life, here's what you think. You think that you figure out the best way to live your life. You decide what the standards are that you think are okay. You establish your guidelines for your life. You figure out your best practices. You come to an understanding of what you think is right and what you think is wrong. And then we want God's role to accept all that and bless it. And there's a lot of us in the room who believe in God, And we live our life right like that. It is our rule, we decide, and he blesses us. Watch that. Those are Sunday people. There's gobs of them. They follow Jesus all the way to Jerusalem. When Jim was describing that, he said, now he's learned through the years that people who really get this and don't go through the motions, when they really get it, they learn to twist things around a little bit. Check this out. Because they learn to live his rule and our role. And those people who live like that, God decides how life is to be lived. God sets the standards. God chooses the best guidelines. God makes the rules. God decides this is right and that's wrong. And what is our role? Our role is to align to his rule. Now watch this, watch this, watch this. Those are Friday people. And there's just a few of them. And so the question comes to this. The question is, am I a Sunday person or am I a Friday person? Am I in the massive crowd that decides this is what God will do for me? Or have I made the switch and this is what I will do for him? Are you living in Sunday or are you living in Friday? Now, while you're thinking about that, I'm going to send you home a little bit with something I want you to do about that. But while you're thinking about that, I want to remind you what I want you to do when you leave, okay? Like we do every weekend, okay? Thanks for being here. If you're one of our guests, we've got something for you. Make sure you go out there and take care of that. Sign up for Pathway. That's a big deal. Get on your app. Give your offering if you've not done it yet, or in the boxes. So you all know that, okay? Now come on back. Come on back here. Why would anybody be a Friday person? Why would you ever do that? Because you remember that he loves you. Please hear me this. Because he loves me, he's earned the right to lead me. Did anybody get that? And so has that sunk in with you enough that you've chosen in your life that I want to be there on Friday? His rule, my role. The other day, I went outside when the temperature got up above 75 below zero. When it got up where you could live outside, I took a lap of walking around our campus, and many people on our staff do that. A lot of people in our congregation do that. We call them our prayer circles. And so every once in a while we just kind of go out and there's something we want to pray about. And so I had this inkling the other day when it was a little warmer, is I'm going to go out and do a prayer circle, and I generally will have something I want to pray about. And so I went out there, and I had thought when I was walking out there that I'm going to today pray for my grandchildren. I do that from time to time. I just want to talk to the Father about these 6 beautiful kids. And sometimes, it's, help them in school and give them good friends and help their parents not be so mean at them all the time. Sometimes it's just kind of basic things. And I didn't hear nothing, so I'm not a weirdo, don't think that. But I go out there and I'm just kind of overcome with this idea that God, I want to ask you, and I chose each one of them by name. I want to ask you that you do what you have to do in their life. Listen carefully to this, so that at some point they fall in love with Jesus. To just fall in love with Jesus. And I don't know why that was such a big deal to me that day, but I just got thinking, man, if they fall absolutely in love with Jesus, then everything else that I always mention, it just kind of is taken care of. Would you fall in love with Jesus? And I think that was probably kind of on my mind, maybe because I had recently myself fallen. I didn't tell anybody about it, but I fell a few weeks ago. It was at night. It was cold outside. It was the last big snow thing we had, and I'm watching a ball game, minding my own business in the warmth of my house, and just kind of chilling out. And my wife's up in the kitchen, and she yells down to me, "Hey, we got to get a car seat out of that car," because somebody was coming to pick up one of the kids' car seats out of the car out in the driveway. And I didn't want to go out there. It was cold. It was dark. I'm watching the game. I want to wrestle a car seat. And y'all wrestle a car seat, trying to get them out, okay? The people who designed that will not be in heaven. You can mark that down. They're not going to be there. And I'm like, I do not want to go out there and get that thing. But I know I got to, so I'm in a bad mood about it. And I go out in the garage. I don't have any shoes on. I threw some flip-flops in the garage and open the door. It's freezing out there. And I go out there and I'm yanking this thing out of the seat and kind of griping about it. And I couldn't see it because it was dark, but one of the cup holders was full of liquid. I don't know if it's water. I don't know if it's juice. I don't know if it's a bodily fluid. I don't know what it is. But when I yank that thing out, all the water just comes flying all over me. And I'm startled because I didn't expect that. And so I jump back on the snow and ice. And you know how you're running not to fall down, okay? So I'm running not to fall down with a car seat and flip-flops. And the car seat goes flying, and I go flying, and I land on my knees, and my foot gets twisted around, and I'm sliding, and I stop about this far from doing a header into the other car in the driveway. I'm laying there, and I didn't move because I wanted to make sure, St. Peter wasn't going to say, "Hey, how you doing?" So, is this it? And I start moving around, and I go inside, get up, go inside. I'm looking at the damage, and I've cut my leg. Both my knees feel shattered. I got 4 toes, look like they need to be amputated. And my wife, unbeknownst to anything, yells up in the kitchen, "Did you get the car seat?" And I said, "Yeah, I about died." And she said, "Thank you." That's all she said. And I recovered and got past all that, and it's not a thing. And then a few weeks later, I walk out, and I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray for Ace and Jad and Ellie and Harper and River and Harley. And I say, "God, can you help them fall in love with Jesus?" Because what struck me is that when you fall in love with Jesus, you can't get back up. You can't recover. Friday people fall in love with Jesus and they never recover. Let's go live like it's Friday. Father, I come before you and I thank you for what you taught me this week. I never saw that in your word. And this week I saw what you were trying to tell us on Monday. Is that because you love us, you want us to submit to your lead. And I just don't know how that works unless we're in love with you. And so there's a lot of us who have patted ourselves on the back because we were there on Sunday. We're Sunday people. And I'm sorry for trying to get you to mold into my agenda. Help me to mold into yours. Help me to fall in love with you like it's Friday. Amen. Have a great week, okay? God bless you. Have a great week.